Mr. Dark Whispers.
Imagine a secret, town-wide secret, so deeply ingrained, so universally accepted, that questioning it is unthinkable. It's a tradition where every year a child is selected. It's chosen by nature itself, by ticks. Hundreds of them, and everyone cheers. Everyone celebrates, even your own parents. They call it an honor. But what if you saw the truth? What if you saw the cost of that honor? The empty eyes, the whispered lies. What if you watched it steal your sister, piece by piece, and then, one morning, you woke up with a pulsing boil behind your ear, knowing it was your turn? This is the story of how I tried to break a cycle of horror, even if it meant sacrificing everything. If you've ever felt like the world around you was just wrong, like everyone else was in on a secret you couldn't grasp, then hit that like button, subscribe, and get ready. Because this isn't just a scary story. This is about fighting for your sanity, for your truth, when the whole world tells you you're crazy. 3 years ago, my world began to unravel with the quiet, methodical movement of tiny, dark bodies. I woke up that morning not to the usual chirping birds or the warmth of the sun, but to the feeling of something crawling on my skin. A shiver, icy and immediate, traced its way down my spine. Before my eyes even opened, when I finally forced them open, what I saw made my blood run cold. Dozens of ticks. Not just on my bed sheets, but on Amelia, my sister. My older sister by 2 years, who usually slept like a log. They were a scattered, moving tapestry of black and brown, clinging to her arms, her neck, even her eyelids. More of them were on her bedroom windowsills and the cracks of the floorboards, all converging like tiny, insatiable vampires drawn to her, thirsty for her precious blood. That's how we knew. That's how we knew Amelia had been selected. She was ecstatic. I remember her grin, wide and unburdened, as she looked at me later that morning, her warm green eyes burning with an almost feverish excitement. And around us, everyone else echoed her joy. Our classmates, our teachers, the mailman, Deacon Miller from church, even Mrs. Rodriguez. The kind Colombian woman who owned the grocery store, they were all elated. Their voices swelled with pride, their faces beaming with a sense of collective triumph. Amelia's a great kid, a real fine specimen. This makes total sense to me, my grandpa remarked, his voice thick with unadulterated admiration. It was like she'd won the lottery, discovered a cure for cancer, and been crowned queen of the universe all at once. Even our parents, who usually fretted over the smallest scrape or sniffle, were buzzing with a strange, almost manic excitement. Never mind that their only daughter would have to live alone in the woods for an entire year, doing God only knew what to survive. That thought, that terrifying reality, seemed to simply evaporate in the face of this honor. The night of the summer solstice, Amelia would leave. The previous year's selected would return, their paths crossing for a brief, almost sacred moment on the bridge that led from Camp Ehrlich to an isolated plateau of land known as Glass Harbor. You see, being selected was more than just an honor. It was a divine blessing, an unbiased testament to your inherent worth. This wasn't some rigged game, no overblown popularity contest. There were no judges to bribe, no events to practice for, no lucky winners or shoo-ins. Selection was pure, because nature decided. You were chosen solely on the grounds that you deserved the honor. An unbiased evaluation of your soul, through and through. The chosen few destined for greatness. The town usually had a good idea who that person was by early June. Once nature decided, there was no avoiding their messengers. Amelia could have bathed in a river of insect repellent, and it wouldn't have made a damn bit of difference. The little bloodsuckers would have still been descending upon her in the hundreds, thirsty for the anointed crimson flowing through her veins. Every summer, around the crackling campfire at Camp Ehrlich, the counselors would close out their explanation of the selection process with a cryptic mantra, 17 words that had been practically branded on the inside of my skull. Given how much I heard them growing up, asterisk, asterisk, those who leave for Glass Harbor have perfect potential. Those who return a year later are perfect, asterisk, asterisk. Amelia was so happy. I remember her grinning at me, her green eyes burning, a reflection of the town's collective joy. But as I smiled back, forcing the corners of my mouth upwards, I felt nothing. No warmth. No excitement. I desperately wanted to share in her elation, to finally feel normal. to be part of the collective sigh of approval. But that excitement never arrived, no matter how much I learned about selection, no matter how many times the purpose of the ritual was explained, no matter how much it seemed to exhilarate and inspire everyone else. The tradition never sat right with me. Thinking about it always caused my guts to churn, a deep, nauseating seasickness. I reached across the kitchen table, my thumb and forefinger forming a pincer. While Amelia gushed about the news, a black and brown adult deer tick was crawling, slowly, deliberately, across her cheek. Its movements were unsteady, languid, probably already partially engorged with her blood. It crept closer and closer to her upper lip. I didn't want the parasite to attach itself there. I had to intervene. Right as I was about to pinch the tiny devil, my mother's hand descended, a blur of motion, slapping my hand away, hard. I yelped, a sharp, childish sound pulling my hand back, hot tears stinging my eyes. When I peered up, she was standing beside the table, her face scrunched into a furious scowl. A plate of bacon in one hand, the other pointed at me, accusing. "Don't you dare, Thomas. We've taught you better." I understand feeling envious, but that's no excuse. Envious. The word hung in the air, a convenient lie. I didn't bother explaining what I was actually feeling. The profound revulsion, protectiveness, the deep, unsettling dread. Honestly, being openly skeptical of selection, even if born from a protective instinct for my sister, would have sent my mother into hysterics. It was safer to let her believe I was just a jealous younger brother. I just nodded, my chin tucked into my chest. Her scowl slowly unfurled into a tenuous smile at the sight of my contrived contrition. "Look at me, honey. You're special too. Don't worry," she said, her voice sluggish, monotonous, like she was having a hard time convincing herself, let alone me. I struggled to maintain eye contact. My gaze kept drifting away, stolen by nightmarish movement in my periphery. As Mom attempted to reassure me, I witnessed it. The tick squirmed over the corner of Amelia's grin, a tiny dark shadow, and disappeared into her mouth. My sister didn't even seem to notice. Like I said, she was ecstatic. Every kid between the ages of 7 and 17 spent their summer at Camp Ehrlich. No exceptions. It was an edict carved in stone, a non-negotiable part of growing up in our town. From what I remember, though, no one seemed to mind. Our town had a knack for churning out affluent people. They'd often give back to the camp that gave them everything with sizable grants and donations. Because of that, the campgrounds were both luxurious and immaculately maintained. 8 tennis courts, 2 baseball fields, a climbing wall, an archery range, indoor bunks with a sea, a roller hockey rink. I won't bore you with a comprehensive list of every ostentatious amenity. The point is, we all loved it. How could we not? It was a child's paradise, hidden in the wilderness of northern Maine, mandated for use by the local government. I suppose that was the insidious trick that propped up the whole damn system. 95% of the time, Camp Ehrlich was great. It was like an amusement park and recreation center hybrid, free for us to attend because it was a town requirement. The other 5% of the time, however, they were indoctrinating us. It was a perfectly devious ratio. The vast majority of our days didn't involve discussing selection. They sprinkled it in gently. It was never heavy-handed, nor did it bleed into the unrelated activities. A weird assembly one week, a strange arts and crafts session the next. None of them taking us away from the day-to-day festivities long enough to draw our ire. A spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. The key was they got to us young. Before we could even understand what we were being subjected to, their teachings started to make a perverse sort of sense. Asterisk selection is just an important tradition, a unique part of our town's history that other people may not understand, but that doesn't make it wrong. Asterisk, every prom designates a king and queen, right? Most jobs have an employee of the month. The selected are no different. Special people, with a special purpose, on a very special day. Asterisk, the selected don't leave forever. No, they always come back to us, safe and sound. Better, actually. Think about all the grown-ups that were selected when they were kids, and all the important positions they hold now. Senators, scientists, lawyers, physicians, CEOs. Asterisk, isn't our town just great? Aren't we all so happy? Shouldn't we want to spread that happiness across the world? That would be the neighborly thing to do, right? Oh, what a load of bullshit. I couldn't tell you exactly why I was born with an immunity to the propaganda. Certainly didn't inherit it from my parents. Didn't pick it up from any wavering friends either. There was just something unsettling about the selection ceremony. I always felt this invisible frequency vibrating through the atmosphere on the night of the summer solstice. A cosmic scream emanating from the land across the bridge, transmitting a blasphemous message that I could not seem to hide from. The selected endured unimaginable pain during their year on Glass Harbor. It changed them. And it wasn't for their benefit. It wasn't really for ours either. Okay, so tell me, who was the first selected? I demanded. The amphitheater went silent. 1,000 eyes turned to me. The camp counselor, a lanky, bohemian-looking man in his late 50s, directing the assembly, glared. Kids shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Amelia slumped beside me, rested a pale, pleading hand on mine. Her fingers dappled with an assortment of differently sized ticks, like she was flaunting a collection of oddly shaped rings. "Tom, please, don't make a fuss," she whimpered, her voice thin, almost translucent. For better or worse, I ignored her.
Oh.
It was a week until the summer solstice, and I'd become progressively more uncomfortable with the idea of losing my sister to Glass Harbor for an entire goddamn year. "How do you mean?" the counselor asked from the stage, his voice laced with forced patience. Rage sizzled over my chest like a grease burn. He knew exactly what I was getting at. "I mean, you're explaining it like there's always been a swap. One selected leaves Camp Ehrlich. One selected returns from Glass Harbor. But that can't have been the case with the first person. It doesn't make sense. There wouldn't have been anyone already on Glass Harbor to swap with. So, my question is, who was the first selected? Who left Camp Ehrlich to live on Glass Harbor without the promise of being swapped out a year down the road? It was a reasonable question, a logical one. Well, but those sessions weren't intended to be a dialogue. I could practically feel everyone praying I would just shut up, that I would conform. The counselor forced a plastic smile. "Well, Tom, selection is a tradition older than time, something we've always done, and something we'll always continue to do, because it's making the world a better place. See, those who leave for Glass Harbor have perfect potential, and those who—" I interrupted him. I couldn't stand to hear that classic tagline, not again, not while Amelia sat next to me, covered in parasites, nearly passing out from the constant exsanguination. "You are not answering my question." I said my words slow, deliberate, each one a hammer blow. "But fine, if you don't like that one, here are a few others. How does selection make the world a better place? Why haven't we ever been told what the selected do on Glass Harbor? How do they change? Why don't the selected who return tell us anything about the experience? And for Christ's sake, how are we all comfortable letting this happen to our friends and family?" I gestured towards Amelia. A pallid husk of the vibrant girl she used to be, slumped lifelessly in her chair, her skin a mottled landscape of engorged ticks. The counselor snapped his fingers, his forced smile replaced by a hard line. He looked to someone at the very back of the amphitheater. Seconds later, strong hands clamped onto my arms. I was violently yanked to my feet by a pair of men in their early 20s and dragged outside against my will. They didn't physically hurt me, but they did incarcerate me. I spent the next 7 days locked in one of the treatment rooms in the camp's sick bay. Unfortunately, or perhaps intentionally, they placed me in a room on the 3rd floor, facing the south side of Camp Ehrlich. That meant I had an excellent view of the ritual grounds, an empty plot of land at the edge of camp, a cruel choice that only became crueler when the summer solstice finally rolled around. As the sun fell, painting the sky in fiery hues, I paced the room in the throes of a panic attack. My fist slammed against the door, my voice raw as I implored them to let me out. "I'm sorry for the way I behaved. Really, I wasn't thinking straight," I begged, my voice cracking. "Just please, let me see Amelia one last time before she goes." No response. There was no one present in the sick bay to hear my groveling. Everyone, the staff, the kids, the counselors, were all gathered on the ritual grounds. No less than 1,000 people, a sea of flickering candlelight, singing, laughing, hugging, and dancing. I watched one of the elders trace the outline of Amelia's vasculature on her legs and arms in fine black ink, a ceremonial marking to empower the 16-year-old for the terrifying journey to come. I tried not to look, but I couldn't help myself. My gaze was a magnet drawn to her. The crowd went eerily silent, 1,000 heads bowing, 1,000 eyes averted from Amelia and the pathway that led out of Camp Ehrlich, as was tradition. For the first time in my life, I did not follow suit. My eyes remained pressed against the glass, glued to my sister. She was clearly weak on her feet. Her movements were sluggish, her body swaying as she lumbered forward. Stumbling multiple times as she pressed on, inching closer and closer to the forest. As instructed, she followed the flickering light of the candles into a palisade of thick, ominous pine trees. Supposedly, those lights would guide her to the bridge. And then, Amelia was gone. Swallowed whole by the shadow-cast thicket. Never got to say goodbye. 30 minutes later, another figure appeared at the forest's edge. Damien, last year's selected, walked quietly into view, then rang a tiny bell he'd been gifted before leaving 365 days prior. That's all the counselors ever gave the selected. No food, no survival gear, no water. Just an antique handbell with a rusted greenish bell bearing. The crowd erupted at the sound of his return. Once the festivities died down, they finally let me out of my cage. Over the next year, I continued to feel the repercussions of my outburst. When I arrived home from camp in the fall, my parents were livid. They had been thoroughly briefed on my dissent, my betrayal of the town's sacred tradition. Dad screamed. Mom refused to say anything to me at all, her silence a colder, sharper punishment than any shout. Grandpa just held a look of profound sadness in his eyes, though. I'm not sure that was entirely because of his disappointment in me. I think he missed Amelia. God, I did too. Every single day was a dull ache in my chest. None of my classmates are SVPD for my 14th birthday party. Not sure if their parents forbade them from attending, or if they themselves didn't want to be associated with a social pariah. Either way, the rejection was agonizing. For a while I was broken. Didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't really think much. No, I simply carried my body from one place to another. A ghost in my own life. I kept up appearances as best I could. Unilateral conformity seemed like the only route to avoiding more pain. One night, that all changed. I was cleaning out the forgotten space under my bed when my fingers brushed against something familiar. The homemade booklet felt decidedly fragile in my hands. Its edges worn, its paper yellowed. I sneezed, inhaling a cloud of dust, and nearly ended up snapping the thing in half. When Amelia and I were kids, back before I had even been introduced to Camp Ehrlich, we used to make comics together. This one, the one I cradled in my hands, detailed a highly stylized account of how me and her had protected a helpless turtle from a shark attack at the beach. In the climatic panels, Amelia Roundhouse kicked the creature's head while I grabbed the turtle and carried it to safety. It was beautifully dumb and tragically nostalgic, in that booklet. It reawakened me. She really was my best friend. At first, it was just sorrow, a deep, heavy sadness. I hadn't felt any emotions in a long while, so even the cold embrace of melancholy was a relief. But that sorrow didn't last. In the blink of an eye, it fell to the background, outshined by this blinding supernova of white-hot anger. My hand shot deeper under the bed, found my old Little League bat, gripped the handle tightly, and I beat my mattress to a pulp. Battered the poor thing with wild abandon, each swing a release, until my breathing turned ragged and my muscles screamed. The primordial catharsis felt amazing. Not only that, but I derived a bit of wisdom from the tantrum. What I did, thrashing a mattress in the dark, wasn't too loud. I expressed my discontent behind closed doors. A tactical release of rage, in direct comparison to my outburst at Camp Ehrlich the summer before. Expressing my skepticism like that was short-sighted. It felt like the right thing to do, a moment of defiant honesty, but God, was it loud. Not only that, but the public display outed me as a non-believer, and what did I have to show for it? Nothing. Amelia still left for Glass Harbor, and none of my questions received answers, because of course they didn't. The people who kept this machine running wouldn't be inclined to give out that information just because I asked, with some anger stewing in my voice. If I wanted answers, I'd need to find them myself, and I need to do it quietly. 4 months later, I was back at Camp Ehrlich. Thankfully, the counselors hadn't decided to confine me as a prophylactic measure on the night of the solstice. I'd done a good job convincing them of my newfound obedience, my newfound belief in the tradition, so they allowed me to participate in the festivities. That year selected was only 10 years old, a shy boy named Henry. I watched with a covert disgust as the counselors helped him take his iron pills every morning, trying to counterbalance the anemic effects of his infestation. He was fading, just like Amelia had. Everyone bowed their heads and closed their eyes as the ritual began. As I listened to the sad sounds of Henry softly plodding into the forest, I reviewed what I'd learned about Glass Harbor through my clandestine research. Fortunately, I hadn't found much. Maybe there wasn't much out there to find, or maybe I wasn't scouring the right corners of the internet. What I discovered was interesting, sure, but it didn't untangle the mystery by any stretch of the imagination either. Still, it had been better than finding nothing, and Amelia was due to return that night. I wanted to arm myself with as much knowledge as humanly possible before I saw her again. Glass Harbor was about to square miles of rough, uninhabited terrain, plateaus situated above a freshwater river running through a canyon hundreds of feet below. The only easy way onto the landmass was a wooden bridge built back in the 1950s. At one point, there had been plans to construct a water refinery on Glass Harbor. Multiple news outlets released front-page articles espousing how beneficial the project was going to be for the community, both from a financial and from a public health perspective. Clean water and fresh money for a better community, one of the titles read. All that hubbub, all that media coverage, and then nothing, not a peep. No reports on how construction was progressing, no articles on the refinery's completion. For some reason, the project just vanished from public record. It has to be related, I thought. Asterisk, the ticks draining blood. The idea of a water refinery. There's a connection there. A replacement of fluid. Detoxification or something. Asterisk, truthfully, I was grasping at straws. Asterisk, Amelia will fill in the rest for me. I'm sure of it. Asterisk, I was so devastatingly naive back then. None of the selected ever talk about what transpires on Glass Harbor. It's considered very disrespectful to ask them about it, too. But it's Amelia, I rationalized. Asterisk, she'll tell me. Of course she'll tell me. Asterisk, the somber chiming of a tiny handbell rang through the air, breaking the silence. My head shot up, and there she was, standing tall on the edge of the forest. Amelia. She looked healthy, vital. Her skin was pest-free and no longer pale. She wasn't emaciated. Her body was lean and muscular. She was wearing the clothes she left in blue jeans and a black Mars Volta t-shirt, but they weren't dirty. No, they appeared pristine. There wasn't a single speck of dirt on her outfit. We all leapt to our feet, cheering, a wave of relief washing over the crowd. For a second, I felt normal, elated to have my sister back. But before I could truly revel in the celebration, a familiar frequency assaulted my ears. That horrible cosmic scream vibrating through the very air intensified. From the back of the crowd, I stared at my sister wide-eyed. There was something wrong with her. I just knew it. My attempts to badger Amelia into discussing her time on Glass Harbor proved fruitless over the following few weeks. I started subtle, hinted that I knew about the watery refinery in passing. Nudged her to corroborate the existence of that enigmatic building. You must have come across it, I whispered one night, waiting for her response from the top bunk of our private cabin at camp. I know she heard me, but she pretended to be asleep. Adolescent passion is such a fickle thing. I was so headstrong initially, so confident that Amelia and I would crack the mysteries of selection wide open. But when she continued to stonewall me, my once voracious confidence was completely snuffed out. Emotionally exhausted and profoundly forlorn, I let it go. At the end of the day, Amelia did come back. Mostly. If I didn't think about it, I was often able to convince myself that she never left in the first place. On the surface, she acted like the sister I'd lost. Her smile was familiar, her mannerisms nearly identical. But she was different, even if it was subtle. An encounter I had with her early one August morning all but confirmed that fact. I woke up to the sounds of muffled retching coming from the bathroom, followed by whispering, then again more retching. I crept out of bed. Neon red digits on our cabin's alarm clock read 4:58 a.m. I tiptoed over to the bathroom door, careful to avoid the floorboards that I knew creaked under pressure. More retching. More whispering. It was Amelia's voice. For some inexplicable reason, though, the bathroom lights weren't flicked on. As gently as I could, I pushed the door open. My eyes scoured the darkness, searching for my sister. Given the retching, I expected to see her huddled in front of the toilet, but she wasn't there. Eventually, I landed on her silhouette. She was inside the shower with the sliding glass door closed, sitting on the floor with her back turned away from me. Honestly, I have a hard time recalling the exact order of what happened next. All I remember vividly is the intense terror that coursed through my body, heart thumping against my rib cage, cold sweat dripping down my feet and onto the tile floor, hands trembling with a manic rhythm. "Amelia, are you all right?" The words barely a breath. The whispering and retching abruptly stopped. I grabbed the handle and slid the glass door to the side. A musty odor exploded out from the confined space. It was earthy, but also rotten smelling, like algae on the surface of a lake. My eyes immediately landed on the shower drain. There were a handful of small, coral-shaped tubes sprouting from the divots. Amelia was bent over the protrusions. She had her hands cupped beside them. An unidentifiable liquid dripped from the tubes into her hands. Once she had accumulated a few tablespoons of the substance, she brought her hands to her mouth and ferociously drank the offering. I gasped, a choked, horrified sound. Amelia slowly rotated her head towards me, coughing and gagging as she did. Her eyes were lifeless. Her expression was vacant and disconnected. In a raspy, waterlogged voice, she said, "It's such a heavy burden to carry the new blood, Tom." The previously inert tubes rapidly extended from the drain and shot towards me. I screamed. Or I thought about screaming. It all happened so quickly. Next, I remember I woke up in bed. Amelia vehemently denied any of that happening. She insisted it was a bad dream. Eventually, I actively chose to believe her. It was just easier that way. Easier to live in the blissful ignorance the town propagated. From that summer on, Amelia's life got progressively better, and mine got progressively worse. She graduated valedictorian of her class, received a full ride to an Ivy League college with plans to study biochemistry. "She's on track to becoming the next Surgeon General," my dad would say, beaming. Amelia had plenty of close friends to celebrate her continued achievements as well. Her life on the surface was the living embodiment of the selection's promise. Me, on the other hand, barely made it through high school. No close friends to speak of, though I do have a steady girlfriend. We initially bonded over a shared hatred of selection, a quiet, furious understanding of the rot beneath the town's polished surface. Over the last year, Hannah's been my rock, my anchor in a sea of pervasive, unsettling conformity. We've fantasized about exposing selection to the world at large, writing up and publishing our own personal accounts of the horrific practice, hoping to get the FBI involved or something. To blow the lid off this idyllic nightmare, recent events have forced our hand earlier than we would have liked. 3 weeks ago, Amelia died in a car crash. Her death sent shockwaves through our town's social infrastructure, but not just for the obvious reasons. Everyone's grieving, myself included, but it was something my dad whispered to my grandpa at her funeral that really got me concerned. None of the selected have ever died before, not to my knowledge at least. By definition, this shouldn't have happened. Does it break the deal? Does anyone know what to do about this? The more I reflected on it, the more I realized that my dad was right. I didn't personally know all of the recently selected. There's a lot of them scattered throughout the world, but I'd never heard of any of them dying before, not a single one. "Don't worry," my grandpa replied, his voice low, urgent. "We can fix this. It won't be ideal, but it will work." This morning I woke up before my alarm rang, disturbed by a peculiar sensation. Powerful, insistent need to itch the inside curve of my ear. My sleepy fingers traced the appendage until they stumbled upon a firm pulsing boil that hadn't been there the night before. A fully engorged deer tick was hooked into the flesh of my ear. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of realization. I scrambled out of bed, rushed to the bathroom, and in the harsh glare of the fluorescent light, the truth became undeniable. 30 other ticks were attached to my body, on my palms, in my hair, over my back. This is only the beginning, too. The solstice is only 6 days away. Please, please help me. Don't want to change. I don't want to go to Glass Harbor. Don't want to carry the new blood. First, it was Ava. Shames me to admit, but I don't recall much about her. I was 7 years old when I spent my first summer at Camp Ehrlich, and I'd only seen her wandering about town with her adolescent compatriots a few times prior to that. I remember she had these soulful, white-blue eyes, like a newborn husky. 2 sprightly balls of crystallized antifreeze sequestered behind a pair of rimless, box-shaped glasses. That was before she departed for Glass Harbor, however. By the night of the solstice, Ava had become lifeless, borderline comatose. Selection and its vampiric ambassadors drank the color from the poor girl's face until her cold, pale skin nicely matched her seemingly bloodless eyes. Her disrepair was ultimately irrelevant. It's not that we didn't care, it's more that it just didn't matter. We all still bowed our heads and closed our eyes, as was tradition, of course. We didn't watch as Ava dragged her desiccated body into the candlelit mass of pine trees. We didn't observe or pity her frailty because it was transient. In 1 year's time, she'd emerge from those pines a perfected person, healthy, whole, and human. Right then it was Lucas. He was strong but reserved, soft-spoken but sweet. Helped me up when I fell off my bike once. The pines swallowed him too, but he did come back. Right? The next year Charlotte was selected. After that, Liam, followed by Evelyn, James, Amelia, Henry, Bailey, and Jackson. And then finally it was my turn to make up for Amelia's untimely death. Nature had selected me. A divine runner-up for the esteemed position. To the town's credit, they were pretty close. I've learned that 67 was the number required to fulfill their end of the bargain. Before Amelia died, there were 65 of them out there in the world. In the end, though, they failed. What's worse, they wouldn't even understand why they failed until I returned from Glass Harbor. It's 364 days ahead of schedule. But hey, it was a virtuous pursuit all the same, a noble cause. They did what they could to make this world a better place. Because asterisk, those who leave for Glass Harbor have perfect potential. Those who return a year later are perfect asterisk. Right, Tom? Tom? My grandfather's raspy voice trickled into my ears. A gentle, tinnitus-laden crescendo that exiled from my mind's eye images of all the selected who had walked this path before me. My gaze fell from the sky to the old man kneeling near my ceremonial seat on the ritual grounds. The night of the solstice had arrived at Camp Ehrlich. Did you say something, Grandpa? I muttered, my voice hoarse, distant. A faint chuckle left his lips, causing his bushy silver mustache to quiver. I said, "Hold still. Your legs are squirming up a storm, and this is precise work," he remarked, bringing his fine-tipped acrylic pen into view. I nodded, and he returned to tracing the vasculature of my right calf over my skin. "If you hold still, there might be time for dancing after I'm done here, you know," he declared, his tone upbeat and playful, a jarring contrast to the cold dread settling in my bones. Ignored his attempt at levity. Something he said struck me as odd. I could have sworn these markings were just to empower me for the journey to come. So why would they need to be precise? He acted like he didn't hear me, but I felt the pen's pointed tongue falter slightly as I posed the question. It wasn't too hard for him to feign deafness, though, as the ritual grounds were buzzing with jubilant noise and frenetic movement. Hundreds of kids gallivanting around the gigantic empty field on the southern edge of the camp, chatting and laughing and playing. A piano concerto droned over the camp's loudspeakers. I'd heard it plenty before, not that I could name who composed it. Tune was lively and melodically lush, but it wasn't necessarily happy-sounding, something I'd never noticed until that moment. Bittersweet is probably the right word. I wasn't the center of attention like I imagined I'd be either. No, I was more like a fixture of the party rather than a person being celebrated. The maypole that everyone danced around, symbolic but inanimate. "Why do these markings need to be precise, Grandpa?" I repeated, louder this time. He pretended not to hear me better the second time around, let a volcanic sigh billow from my lungs. The display of frustration finally prompted him to respond. "You know, Tom, Amelia wasn't like this. She embraced selection with open arms. God rest her soul. You could stand to have a little more dignity. It's the least you can do to honor her memory." His voice was tight, strained. My eyes drifted back to the sky. I found myself comforted better by the purple-orange swirls of cloudy twilight than my own flesh and blood. "Yeah, well, that was her default setting, wasn't it?" I retorted, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. More than anything, she wanted approval. You know how hard Mom was on her growing up. She was desperate for unconditional acceptance, and selection gave it to her. I don't know much about Mom's parents, but maybe if she was raised by someone more like you, she would have been a smidge more generous with her love. If I'm being honest, though, I've been desperate for approval too, even if I didn't chase after it like Amelia. Never had Mom dote over me like she has this past week. The around-the-clock home-cooked meals, have been nice. The way she's looked at me has been nicer. He let the pen fall away from my skin, but did not look up. His silence was deafening. That said, her grace didn't make a huge difference in the end, did it? I continued, my voice gaining strength. Closed casket funeral before she even turned 21, fell asleep at the wheel and drove headfirst into oncoming traffic. Amelia was a tiny blip on the world's radar. You know that, right? Nothing more, nothing less. She was born, selected, and then exhausted. So much so that it killed her. What a fucking miserable waste. It was hard to determine whether he agreed with me or if my indignation had made him livid. He put the pen back to my skin, shaking his head vehemently, but he did not respond to my tirade. For the next few minutes, I leaned over and silently watched him perform his cryptic duties. With the climax of the concerto blaring over the speaker system, its melody crackling with static, I noticed something alarmingly peculiar. In my lethargic, blood-drained state, I don't think I would have picked up on it if I wasn't actively watching. I know it's important, even if I don't know why yet. To be clear, I wasn't alone in that rickety antique chair. No, I was utterly infested with ticks. I'd given up counting the total number. The surface of my body had lost its smooth, contoured surface, and it had been replaced by a new biologic geography. Peaks and valleys that were constantly shifting as the parasites scoured my frame, seeking to excavate fresh plasma from my weathered skin. And of course, it was improper to remove any of them. Mom sure as shit beat that lesson into my head over the last week. But then, how had Grandpa been so precisely outlining my vasculature? Weren't the ticks in the way? They were. That wasn't a problem, however. When Grandpa needed one to move, he'd simply tap their engorged black hides and they'd move. Somehow it seemed like they understood his command. I wouldn't have believed it if I didn't see it myself, before I could even find the words to the question I wanted to ask. The concerto came to a close, and the ritual grounds hushed. Everyone sat down where they were, closed their eyes, and bowed their heads. My grandpa handed me the ceremonial bell and whispered something that pushed me forward. As soon as you step onto Glass Harbor, ring this, but not a moment before. Be strong. Don't let your sister's sacrifice be in vain. And with that, I stood up and trudged towards the nearest candle, flickering at the edge of the pines, casting shadows that writhed and cavorted over the landscape like the spirits of something old and forgotten, begging for recognition. I won't. The walk from Camp Ehrlich to the bridge wasn't long, but goddamn was it surreal. Silence was customary in the liminal space that existed between one selected leaving for Glass Harbor and the other returning. Only minutes prior, the atmosphere had been practically alive, seething with music and a chorus of different voices. Now, it was nearly empty, save the soft whistling of a breeze and the crunching of pine needles beneath my boots. Prior to being selected, I adored silence. A quiet night always felt like home. Now I couldn't stand it. I knew I couldn't hear them moving. Objectively, I understood that. That didn't help me, though. Felt like I still heard them. All of them. Skittering, biting, drinking. Although the festivities at Camp Ehrlich had died down, my body remained a banquet. I tried to focus on the sensation of the bell in my hand. Previously, I had assumed the instrument was plastic. I'd never seen its espresso-colored curves glimmer in the waning moonlight. It didn't feel like plastic, though. The material was tougher, less pliable, leathery. The thin handle felt almost dusty under my fingertips. After about 20 minutes, I stumbled out onto the other side of the forest. The sun had completely set, and the distant gurgling of rushing water had thankfully replaced the silence. With the last shimmering candle behind me, I continued moving. My eyes scanned the clearing. For a second, I thought I'd taken a wrong turn within the pines. As my vision adjusted to the dim moonlight, I saw it. I always envisioned the bridge as this ornate, larger-than-life structure. Gleaming steel wires holding up a polished metal walkway sturdy enough to support a parade. Anticipation had built this moment into something ethereal and otherworldly. I expected it to be so much more. The bridge was anything but otherworldly. Wooden, uncovered, barely wide enough to fit a sedan, if it could even support something so heavy. Judging by its length, it wouldn't take me more than 30 seconds to cross from Camp Ehrlich onto Glass Harbor. I ran my palm against the railing as I approached, pinky side down to avoid crushing a few of the parasites hooked into the center of my hand. The only part that did live up to my expectations was the chasm that separated the two land masses and its churning river. The water was so far beneath me that I couldn't see it. I only knew it was there because of its constant, dull roar. The sharp pain of a splinter digging into my flesh confirmed that this mystical piece of architecture was, in fact, not a figment of my imagination. I shook my hand, airing out the throbbing discomfort. It was all so mundane, humdrum, pathetic even. I felt my hummingbird of a heartbeat start to slow. For the briefest fraction of a moment, I found myself wondering what exactly I was so afraid of. Then, as if the universe had detected my naivety, the sound of creaking wood began to cut through the noise of rushing water. Someone was approaching, crossing the bridge from the opposite side. "Jay Jackson," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the river. The previous year's selected made themselves known. At the age of 12, they'd survived an entire year on Glass Harbor. "Wow, hey Tom, you're not exactly who I was expecting," he replied, his voice flat, emotionless. Like Amelia, he looked well, healthy, red-blooded, and well-nourished, wearing the same denim overalls and white undershirt he left in. But something was off, subtle wrongness. His eyes, though seemingly vibrant, held a stillness that echoed Amelia's that morning in the bathroom. Glacial fear flooded down the length of my spine. "Well, no time for catching up. Mother Piper is waiting for you. Ring your bell when you get onto Glass Harbor. She'll take it from there," he continued, his voice devoid of any genuine warmth, like a recording. I made myself take a step onto the bridge. The brittle wood moaned in protest. I couldn't move further, was paralyzed, 1 foot on the bridge, 1 foot on Camp Ehrlich. Jackson seemed to sense my hesitation. He did not look upon it favorably. Despite being 6 years my junior and 1/3 my size, he instantly became aggressive with me. "That's a direct order, Tom. Start moving," he bellowed, his voice suddenly sharp, commanding, utterly unlike a 12-year-old boy. My paralysis did not abate. "Have you forgotten your place in the hierarchy?" I said. "Move." His voice was a harsh crack, an unseen whip. He stopped right in front of me and gestured towards Glass Harbor. Despite his commands, I remained fixed in place, my will warring with his unnerving force. He tilted his head and shrugged his shoulders, a gesture of profound confusion, as if my defiance was an anomaly he couldn't process. When he reached out to grab my shoulder, I'm not sure what came over me. A surge of desperate, animalistic self-preservation. I pushed him back with both hands, still grasping the bell in my right. Threw my whole weight into the movement as well. Despite my tick-borne anemia, the push had considerable force, and Jackson was a smaller than average kid. I just didn't want him to touch me, that's all. Please believe me. Jackson stumbled backwards, his pelvis connected with the railing. Before he could steady himself, his body was tilting over the side of the bridge. He didn't scream as he fell onto the rocks below, no cry, no sound. He was just gone. I paced back and forth in front of the bridge, clutching my head with both hands as if my skull would crumble to pieces if I didn't manually keep it all together. Fuck, 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 I muttered, the words a desperate litany. Previously grounding concepts like logic and rationality turned to soup in my mind. I lost all sense of reason. My eyes felt liable to pop out their sockets from the accumulating pressure of a repeating 6-word phrase. Asterisk, I didn't mean to hurt him. I didn't mean to hurt him. I didn't mean to hurt him. It took me a minute of panicking to remember about the items I'd brought with me, and the epiphany hit me like a gut punch. I scrambled to the ground, rapidly untied my boots and pulled them off, laying the bell upright beside me. My trembling hand dug through each until I'd removed both insoles, and then I began shaking them over the grass. A pocket knife, a burner phone, and a compass plopped onto the dirt. It was forbidden to bring anything with you, excluding the bell. I didn't intend on leaving Camp Ehrlich unprepared, however. I grabbed the phone and flipped it open. Thankfully, I'd purged my savings to purchase the version that came equipped with a rudimentary but functional flashlight. I crept over to where Jackson had plummeted over the railing, with visions of his misshapen, tangled limbs and splattered viscera running through my mind. I took as deep a breath as I was able and peered over the edge. It was about a 6-story drop down to the river. The water was shallow and littered with jagged rocks. The dim light only gave a general view of the area under the bridge, but I still didn't spot any blood. Jackson, are you okay?" I shouted. My ragged voice echoed against the walls of the canyon. Other than that, I didn't get a response. Kept searching, praying for signs of life, for any sign that my impulsive act hadn't ended a human life. Asterisk, I didn't mean to hurt him. I didn't mean to hurt him. I didn't mean to hurt him. At one point, I attempted to call 911. The realization that there wasn't enough signal to get my call through felt like I'd just swallowed a barbell. Nausea swam viscous laps around the pit of my stomach. "Jackson, where are you?" screamed, desperation clawing at my throat. Then my eyes hooked onto something. It wasn't clear what I was seeing at first. Even once I better comprehended what I was staring at, it didn't make sense. Elevated above the water on each side of the river were long stretches of flat, bare rock. On the campsite of the riverbank, I spotted Jackson's denim overalls, but his body wasn't in them, no blood either. I backpedaled from the railing, a growing, terrible understanding blooming in my mind. Since I'd been selected, I'd lived in a state of perpetual lightheadedness. Sometimes it was worse, sometimes it was better, but it never completely went away. At that moment, the feeling was at its absolute worst, amplified exponentially by another damning realization. They're all waiting for him back at Camp Ehrlich. What the fuck are they going to do when he doesn't come back? The vertigo grew too heavy. I fell to the rapidly spinning earth. In the process, I accidentally knocked over the bell. It clattered against the ground behind me. The soft sound of a few muffled rings filled the air. My body erupted with movement. Somehow, the chiming of the bell had incited a mass exodus. The ticks were leaving. The banquet was over. The sensation was wildly overstimulating, 1,000 tiny pinpricks of sensation, but beyond welcome. I pivoted my torso, intent on ringing the bell another handful of times for good measure. I wanted every single parasite that had infested my body to hear the message. The bell was quickly becoming unusable, however. I watched in stunned horror as the instrument deteriorated into a familiar mess of silent skittering. Starting with the rim, ticks splintered off the chassis and disappeared within the grass. Slowly, an organic disintegration progressed up the device. Once the handle melted away, there wasn't anything left. It was like the bell had never been there in the first place. Turned back to the bridge. My weary heart did another round of chaotic somersaults in my chest at the sight of another figure on the bridge. One whose approach hadn't been demarcated by the creaking of wood. She waved and beckoned for me to follow. Her green eyes were unmistakable. Amelia. She never really walked, per se. Amelia would always be a few feet ahead of me. As I got closer, I'd blink. Then she'd be a little bit farther away. My sister was like a fishing lure. Soon as I'd get near enough to pull her into a hug, the thing holding the fishing rod would yank her back. Rinse and repeat. Honestly, I didn't care. Real hallucination, illusion, mirage, didn't matter to me. It was Amelia. She didn't really talk either. Not until I got closer to the thing manifesting her, at least. Even then, the word talking doesn't really do the experience justice. It was more that foreign thoughts were injected into my brain from somewhere outside myself, rather than a vocal conversation. A few short minutes of following that specter, and I was there. In a lot of ways, Glass Harbor was a mirror image of Camp Ehrlich. There was the bridge, then the pines, then a large open field with buildings situated along its perimeter. To the untrained eye, the reflection probably would have been imperceptible. But I'd spent enough summers on those hallowed grounds to experience a profound déjà vu as we made our way through the clearing. That's where the similarities end, however. Because the buildings that surrounded the field weren't the remnants of some camp? No, it was an abandoned town. Houses with chipping paint and broken windows, in the process of being reclaimed by the land. Weeds and vines growing over the skeleton of this nameless orphan suburb. As far as I could tell, none of the buildings resembled something industrial like a watery refinery either. That said, I didn't exactly get to tour the ruins. Amelia had different plans. I followed her to a cliff at the western edge of the clearing where the plateau began to drop off into the canyon below. It was treacherous, but she guided me down the side of the landmass until I was standing on the riverbank. At no point did my phone have enough signal to make a call. I considered turning back. I had an exit strategy coordinated with Hannah, my long-term girlfriend. The plan was I'd enter Glass Harbor and walk due south until I hit a country road that curved behind the plateau where she should be waiting for me. From there, I'd call her. Once we found each other, we'd leave this place forever. Put it all behind us. Drive in any one direction for hundreds of miles until we felt safe enough to stop running. For better or worse, though, I modified the plan and continued to follow Amelia. It didn't seem worth it to live a long life blind to the horrors of it all. I decided I'd rather live a much shorter life with the truth neatly situated behind my eyes, if that's what it took. As we got closer and closer to our destination, however, I began regretting that decision. A recognizable smell coated my nostrils as we passed under the wooden bridge. Musty, fungal, slightly sweet. It was the same smell that exploded out of the enclosed shower when I found Amelia bent over, heaving and coughing as she drank the liquid pouring out from the invasive coral-shaped tubes peeking out of the drain. 15 minutes later, I started to see those tubes in the wild. Only a few at first, stuck firmly to the pathway we were traversing. They were all connecting the river to something further upstream, and they pulsed with a sickening peristalsis. I couldn't tell if they were depositing something into the river or drawing water out of the river. I still don't know, honestly. I tried to step around the growths initially. Eventually, though, it was impossible to avoid stepping on them. They'd gotten too large and too numerous. I could barely visualize the bedrock suffocating under their cancerous spread. Finally, the ticks made their reappearance. I didn't even consciously notice them at first. As we were nearing our destination, however, I slipped on one of the tubes. So close to their origin point, they'd become increasingly dilated half a foot in diameter, give or take. Because of that, their peristaltic waves had developed significant energy. The tip of my boot got caught on the rippling tissue, and I fell forward, placing my hand on the cliff wall to avoid falling over completely. I crushed a few dozen parasites as a result. Hundreds of thousands of motionless ticks were uniformly covering the rock wall. I retracted my hand and, using the other, violently scraped my palm, desperate to expel the small chunks of insectoid debris and still twitching legs from my skin. Up ahead, Amelia waved and smiled at me, unbothered. When I looked back at where my hand met the wall, the ticks had already filled in the space, and all was still. Their phalanx was infinite and unshakable. Then, she pointed at a hole in the wall beside her phantasmal body. And I felt what would be the first of many foreign thoughts being injected into my head. Asterisk, asterisk, Mother Piper is waiting for me. In accordance with the deal made over half a century ago, I'm due to receive my portion of the new blood. No need to feel fear. Her children have done their job. My body is ripe for the transplant. Asterisk, asterisk. After all, asterisk, asterisk, those who leave for Glass Harbor have perfect potential. Those who return a year later are perfect asterisk, asterisk. I peered into the hungry darkness of the hole. I'd need to slide on my back in order to fit. One last time, I turned to look at Amelia. The more I appreciated her familiar green eyes, the more I came to terms with the fact that she clearly wasn't real. There was no fire behind them. They were empty. Utterly vacant of the person I had cared so much about. Truthfully, her eyes weren't much different from the hungry darkness of the hole in front of me. In that pivotal moment, I devised a new mantra. Something to replace Glass Harbor's hollow, dogmatic tagline. Something to cut through the insidious whispers and the pervasive emptiness. Ava, Lucas, Charlotte, Liam, Evelyn, James, Amelia, Henry, Bailey, and Jackson. Again, I told myself. Ava, Lucas, Charlotte, Liam, Evelyn, James, Amelia, Henry, Bailey, and Jackson. Ava, Lucas, Charlotte, Liam, Evelyn, James, Amelia, Henry, Bailey, Jackson, and everyone that came before them. I flipped open the burner phone, turned on the flashlight, and began sliding my body into the hole. Not for them. Not for the town. For me. To reclaim my own story, my own sanity. To pull back the curtain on this nightmare, for Amelia and for all the others. And maybe, just maybe, to burn it all down. The darkness of the hole swallowed me. It was tight, claustrophobic, the air thick with that musty fungal smell. My body scraped against the rough, cold stone, and then something wet, squelch, too soft, too yielding. My flashlight beam, weak and flickering, caught it. Not stone. Not damp earth. The walls of this tunnel, this living passage, were entirely covered in the pulsing coral-shaped tubes. They were everywhere, thick as my arm, slithering over each other, a living, breathing network. And on their slick surfaces, a moving, shimmering carpet of ticks. Millions of them. My mind reeled. This wasn't a natural cave. This was the heart of it all, the source. I was sliding right into its gaping maw. A single desperate thought hammered in my skull. Asterisk Jackson's clothes, left on the riverbank. His body simply dissolved, absorbed into this grotesque circulatory system. Asterisk then, a thought, clear as a bell, not my own, echoed in my head. Asterisk, welcome, Thomas. You are precisely what we need. You have returned ahead of schedule. Deal is complete. Asterisk. A chill colder than any tick-infested flesh shot through me. This was it. The core. The Mother Piper. And I wasn't just entering it. I was part of it. The truth in all its horrifying glory was laid bare. And my revenge, my defiance, it wasn't just about escaping. It was about exposing. It was about breaking this system from the inside before I became another statistic. Before I became just another empty-eyed vessel for the new blood. My hands, still clutching the phone, tightened. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the real fight. I thought I was just a boy, caught in a town's twisted tradition, but I became something more. A witness, a fighter. And even as the darkness closes in, the memory of Amelia, the truth of Jackson, and the chilling words of that invisible entity fuel something inside me that no tick, no ritual, no new blood can ever extinguish. The fight for my soul, and perhaps the soul of my town, has just begun. If Thomas's terrifying journey gave you chills, if you felt that sickening dread creeping up your own spine, smash that like button and tell us in the comments, what would you do if your entire world was built on a lie? You were the only one who saw the truth. And of course, subscribe for more stories that will make you question everything.